9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm David Rothkopf. It's Thursday. We talk about politics on Thursday, even if you're not listening to it on Thursday. And we have our gang of merry pranksters here to give us some perspectives on it, including Tom Bonier, who is a veteran Democratic political strategist, the CEO of the Tara Group, and a senior advisor with Target Smart. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm doing pretty good today.
Excellent. And Simon Rosenberg, who is a political strategist and commentator, and who can be found on his Substack, Hopium Chronicles, as well as pretty much everywhere all the time these days. How are you doing, Simon?
I'm feeling good, David. I'm feeling good.
Well, great. And in a little bit, we'll have with us our friend Tara McGowan. But let us start, and let me start with each of you answering a question. We talked a couple weeks ago. Tom, what do you know about the election today that you didn't know then or even a week ago?
There's two big things that we can point to from that sort of time period that I have either continued through, and there was a question of whether or not that would be the case, or new data. In terms of the continuation, I've talked a lot about the new voter registration data and how since the vice president became the nominee, we've seen these large increases from younger voters, women voters, voters of color. So that continues to surge throughout the battleground states. I actually ran some numbers before this. If you look at the new voter registrations and our partisan models over that time period, we model it at plus 17 Democratic. Again, this is just across the 7 battleground states. If you look at the exact same time period for the same states 4 years ago, an election which we won, I should remind everyone, it was actually plus 7 Republican. So it's a 24-point margin swing, which is not nothing. Again, I'll take that as very positive news in terms of just continued intensity and engagement, because it's funny. We get one bad poll on our side and we're convinced the sky is falling, but Democratic voters are still out there registering and doing the thing. The other new data set that we're looking at is early vote data. We're still just like at the point where you can have some interesting tidbits, but it's not going to be super predictive at this moment. A lot of people excited about the Georgia early vote data. Again, in a couple weeks, let's come back and we'll know a lot more, but some good early signs. I mean, the easiest thing we can say, and this is a bit of a cop-out, but it's definitely pointing to high engagement, high turnout, which was an open question whether or not that would be the case. And we are seeing higher turnout. Georgia, obviously, a big one where the first 2 days of early in-person broke records. You're seeing huge numbers in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Some of the other states are lagging behind, just they got a later start. So like North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, it's going to be a little bit before we have enough data to say anything. But the early signs are good, and I'll tag myself as cautiously optimistic on the early tidbits of early vote data.
Excellent. I will take cautiously optimistic, but I will ask Simon to raise it. By the way, Tara has popped in. I even introduced you before you arrived here, Tara. Thanks for joining us. And the question is, in case you haven't been able to guess at what it is, I'm asking everybody, and I will come to you next, what it is we know today that we didn't know a week ago. Okay, so Simon.
Yeah, I think to build on what Tom said, first of all, the national polling has been very consistent and steady. We've got a 2, 3, 4 point national lead. We're closer to 270 in the battlegrounds. We are in stronger position than they are. And what has always made me optimistic is that I felt that we would be able to close stronger, and it was more likely that we would be able to push the election towards us than them, which is why I've said I'd much rather be us than them many times.
That's why everybody says that, Simon.
I know. Because it's true, by the way. And so what I've seen in the early vote is we are seeing our intensity advantage and our ground operational advantage show up. I think we're seeing overperformance in some places where we needed to see it. This doesn't mean it's going to happen through election day. It's still really early, but the early vote is doing better, I think, and for the most part, than Tom and I thought it was going to do, given how unique this election is and how different it is from 2022 and 2020. And I think that the explanation for that is that we just have a far greater capacity on the ground than they do. And this early vote is a test of two things, right? It's a test of organization and intensity. And I think we have more of each. And I think you're seeing that show up, but it's still really close. And we still, cannot take our foot off the gas for 1 minute.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as a cautiously optimistic also. Tara, what do you think? What do you feel? What have you seen? Something concrete you've seen in the last few days that is new to you?
Well, I saw Vice President Harris rip Brett Baer a new one on Fox News this week. That was pretty delightful. No, I am also cautiously optimistic. This is the business we're in. You have to be, and there are a lot of good signs. But I think I am really inspired and proud of everything we have seen the Harris-Walz campaign from day one do, that just continues to get better and stronger at taking the offensive position. No, not resting on any laurels, right? And doing the hardest thing with an unexpected campaign that started not very long ago. And we've seen her in particular continue to adapt and really stand in her power, as she did in the Fox News interview, but as she's doing at every rally, as she's doing by sticking it to traditional media, by actually getting the message out about how unhinged Trump is without them doing that necessarily. I mean, I just have been blown away by her candidacy, her especially, but also the campaign and how creative and risk inclined and aggressive they have been at reaching every type of voter in this country, from Republicans who are watching Fox News at home to young women who are completely politically disengaged who listen to Call Her Daddy every day. It has just been a wildly strategic, brilliant, smart, and creative communication strategy from their point. And I think that they are doing everything that they can think of to bring as many people into this coalition to win as possible. And they're doing it in a way that is really, really, really showing her ability to lead. And that's what we want in a president. So I'm impressed, I'm excited, and I feel more confident because of how they are running this campaign right now.
Yeah,
David, I think you can just end the show now. I think that, like, what else is there?
Oh, well, thanks a lot. You got to go do a CNN hit or something?
No. I think Tara what else is there to say after that? I mean, that was awesome, right?
Yeah, but I think Tara is absolutely right. Not that you other guys weren't, but I think she's right in that. I always noticed when I was back in the Clinton administration, before Tara was born, that
I was born by then, David.
Okay, I don't want to hear about it. But that we always won when we were on offense, and we always lost when we were on defense. And that you've got to lean into it, and the candidate and the campaign are on the front foot, and Trump and his campaign are on the back foot. She's doing more, he's doing less. She's got a better message, she's speaking louder, he's backing off, and so forth. And I think it is a very, very telling sign, Tom, but it does raise the question. We are now in the home stretch, right? There are 18 days to go and a couple hours from the time we're doing this. And as we look at that, what is your prescription for what we should do additionally or differently?
Yeah, I mean, far be it from me to tell them what they should be doing differently. I think Tara's point, they've done an incredible job. I agree. When they're on the front foot, we're in better shape. We definitely saw that in the first few weeks of this short-lived campaign, this 3.5 month sprint. And then it felt like we Democrats did what we do and then started hand-wringing for a while. And it feels like the momentum is coming back now. So certainly, I think they're aware of that. I think they're being smart about it. certainly all the different media appearances that y'all mentioned, feels like they're being more aggressive. The big lift in front of them when we think about the early vote, and you mentioned the last 18 days, that I've been talking a lot about. And again, I know the campaign is aware of this, but I think the whole community needs to be aware of this. What's different from 2020 is we're seeing young voters who are overwhelmingly going to pivot from early voting in 2020 when the pandemic was a thing. COVID was a much bigger concern for people. And you saw the youth vote. It was actually pretty big in early voting. All the signs we see now suggest that that's not going to be the case, that more so than any group, young voters are going to pivot back to election day. So of course that makes me a little bit nervous because, I'm on board with Simon's vote day one campaign. We've actually seen the effect from that, from a lot of these Democratic super voters have actually taken him up on his challenge. And you're seeing that in the early vote. We anticipated this was going to happen anyhow, but for the campaign to make sure that we have that focus, that youth engagement that goes right through election day, and that we are getting them out to vote, but also that we're not giving up on the notion of getting as many of them to vote early as possible, understanding that they'll end up just being a much smaller share of the early vote electorate than they were 4 years ago.
So it's same question, Simon. But maybe I can switch it a little bit with you and with Tara towards something that's a little more messagey. So I felt I feel this is a 3-act play, right? The first act of this play, the first several weeks, she was new, and it was all about what just happened to us, politics of joy, the energy of a new candidate entering the race. The fact that something historic was happening here, they were totally unprepared for it. It defined that period. I think the second act, which I think ended a couple of days ago, I hope, but I think the second act was a little bit more, okay, let's do politics the way we do politics. And it was kind of transactional. It was, we have to build an agenda. She talked with Brett Baer yesterday, said, well, I have 80 pages of agenda on my website. We have to build an agenda, and we're going to do something for everybody. For Black young men, we're going to have this, and for women, we're going to have this, and for this segment, we're going to have that, and so forth. And I think, that's a necessary part of politics. The suggestions were good ones. The one I give the highest grade to is paying for home care, which I think resonates with a ton of people. So it's the kind of thing that really matters. But now we're in the home stretch. And I really feel this desire, this need to get back to the politics of energy and feeling that we started out with. And you talked, I actually had a conversation yesterday where I invoked you. And I said, I said, we talked initially about strong versus weak. And I think in the home stretch, we have to talk about up versus down. We have to talk about lifting America up, having a vision, this being a generational transformation, the John F. Kennedy portion of this campaign versus this other guy who wants to tear us down, this other guy who wants to pull us apart, this other guy who wants to go backwards as opposed to forwards in time. But something to give us that lift and that energy, because ultimately, if it's about turnout, you got to have a reason to show up, and it's not going to be a white paper.
Yeah.
So
I'll dive in, and I want to hear Tara's thoughts on this too, is that, I have this, first of all, campaigns and candidates go through good weeks, bad weeks. They have a clear path and they get lost, right? I mean, it's not always, and particularly for this campaign that they've had to invent, normally campaigns like this have had 18 months to kind of work things out, and they're having to do 18 months of work in a few months. And every week has been a good week for her, and I think, and they've had to do these building blocks in order to get to where they are. But I do think I go back to this sort of two basic views about what you just said. One is she came out of the box in that very first day in Wilmington, and her remarks that day were unbelievably powerful. And I will be honest with you, I was stunned. I was stunned with how coherent, her entire story that she was telling about how she's dealt with people like Trump before. And so she was getting bigger than him and making him small, that I can handle this guy. She also told her story, her immigrant story, the journey her family's been on, being for the people. That initial speech to me was part of the reason she soared in those early days, is that it made sense, and she was going to beat Trump, and she was compassionate and interesting, and she made herself big. And then, and so I've always believed that at some level, the way this election was going to end was by her going back to those things that really kind of defined her in that way in the early days, because it was who she was. I mean, Tara uses this phrase, step into her power. It's a millennial phrase, not one that I've ever used before, but she did from that a woman phrase. Okay. Well, she did that very first day in a very powerful way. And I think that what happened in this new media journey that she went on over the last few weeks is that she had to return to the basics of who she was and what she was about. She wasn't overthinking things. She had to tell her story to new audiences. And I think it regrounded her in the original intent and purpose, powerful purpose of this campaign, and the strength and confidence that she's been bringing. And then she went back to the rallies. And I think the rallies are this happy place for her, right? Like she's happy. The audience is happy. They feed off each other. If you watch these rallies, and I watched that very first one from the other night in North Carolina, the call and response stuff, the way that she's engaging with the audience, the chants that spontaneously grow, this is powerful stuff, man. We've all been doing this a long time. And the kind of stuff that we're seeing in real time with her, it just doesn't happen that often in our business, where you have the level of energy, intensity, passion, and spontaneity, right? Comfort. She's making people comfortable being around her. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to go deep into these rallies. And because this is when she becomes big and strong and powerful and a leader of this country. And they were powerful this week. And so I agree with everything you said, David. And I think that what I was telling people a few days ago was that she just needed to take this campaign by the scruff of its neck and go be herself and go fucking make this happen. And she's doing it. And she's doing it. And that's what leaders do, is that they don't wait around for their campaign. They say, this is where we're going, right? And where she's going right now is why I feel like this feels like a winning campaign. Donald Trump apparently just canceled another speech and another thing. She is strong and she is working hard, closing strong. He's unfit, unwell, and unraveling. And that's where we want this election to be. And I feel good about where we are.
Do you? Would you rather be us?
I'd rather be us than them. I think, David, we're winning this election, but we haven't won it yet.
This is your rally speech, but it's a good one, and that's why everybody's stealing it. But Tara, I'm going to come to you on this, but from a slightly different angle. But I do want to say something parenthetically, which is kind of off the campaign, but on it. One of the reasons that I think it's really important to say up, not down, this is a new generation, a new generational leader who has a vision for America, is not just because I think it shows strength and will energize things, but because the day after the election, she has to start thinking about governing. And what happens in Washington all too frequently is that becomes a discussion, which is already happening, folks, about who gets what job. And who gets what job is not important if you don't know what you're working for. And there has to be established a mission, a goal, a set of purposes to work for. And we need that. Not just because of now through November 5th. We need it for November 5th through January 20th. We need it for the first 100 days, because we have to remember, the end of the day, this is about governing. Sorry, that was my sermonette for the moment. But Tara, let me get back to you and pick up on what Simon was saying. And also pick up on what you said last. Rallies give that feeling. But I got the feeling in the Brett Baer thing, something else, which was, bring it, bitches. I'm here. I'll go to wherever you want to go. I'll do whatever you want to do, and I will kick your ass. And that's like, okay, that's badass, and that's what I want to see. And by the way, that's what I want Vladimir Putin to see. That's what I want other people to see.
Yes, and I also am going to keep that moment of you, David, saying "Bring it, bitches" in my mental archive forever. I love it. Okay. No, it's exactly right. It isn't just the rallies. The rallies are a huge part of it, and what Simon was saying about me talking about stepping into her power, I'm going to take a little point of privilege as a woman and what this means to watch her in her power right now, because something about women in public roles, and especially in politics as candidates or elected officials, but in any aspect of our lives and careers forever, is that we are taught not to trust ourselves. We are told competing things about how we should look or dress or what we can say, what we can't say, how to appease to different people, how to appease to men, etc. It's our whole lives. I don't want to go down too far in my feminist soapbox, but it is true. And I think what we are seeing, and what I mean when I say she has really stepped into her power, is that she trusts herself. And when someone trusts themselves, it makes other people trust them. And she is right now, I loved your setup, David, of the 3 acts, because I hadn't thought of it that way. And you're exactly right. And I think this 3rd act, she is prosecuting the case. She knows how to close as a former prosecutor, and she is closing because she is taking the fight directly and fearlessly and aggressively to Trump and to the contrast between the two of them. And she is staying so true to herself. She's not parroting talking points. Like that Fox interview to me is so important, and everybody should watch it in full if they haven't, because she is punching back, but she is doing it with grace, with integrity. She's doing it on her terms. She says with due respect, but then she gets the message across clearly. She isn't having like a tit for tat fight with Brett in it. She is standing up for her and her positions and her values and her character, frankly. And that contrast is so stark with Trump. And she's hitting him on every single point right now in a way where the campaign, as you mentioned, David, started about joy, which really did increase enormous amounts of engagement and enthusiasm and positivity that we were all so starved for so long in our politics. But now we're watching her fight. We're watching her with her gloves on. And that is the representation that so many of us that have been so terrified about what a Trump administration 2.0 would look like in this country, what it would mean for women in particular, and our ability to have bodily autonomy and rights to make choices about how we live our lives. Literally, the most human aspects of our existence are at stake in this election. And having somebody be such a fierce fighter for those and channel that, it's not even inspiring. It's beyond anything I've experienced in my life and in this work. And I think that is the strength that we're not necessarily used to seeing. And we're not hearing enough about, frankly, either in sort of the punditry around this election, is that she is bringing a different level of gravitas to this race and to this election than I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely right. By the way, the bring it bitches side of I'm from New Jersey. That is the original side of me. And frankly, there are a lot of ways to look at it. 3-act play is a way to look at it. The last couple rounds of a big prize fight is another. Trump likes to use that analogy because he used to hang out with a bunch of crooks and murderers in the boxing business. And when he did, he talks about, I don't need a rematch. I won the first debate. Right. And it's like, actually, no, you didn't. And he's now on his back foot. And in the boxing parlance, you got to finish him. You got to go in and hit him while he's down. And if you want a amusing sidebar on this, I would go to this Dave Bautista.
Oh, it's amazing.
It really is.
2 minute. It's sexist and inappropriate in some ways, but
it's awesome.
But it's kind of it is kind of awesome, and it captures the spirit. So if you haven't listened to that, listen to it. But Tom, one of the things that you guys have been so great is explaining, this poll is right. These polls are politically motivated. There's 60 or 70 of them. You just got to cut them out of the picture. There was a story today, by the way, that broke on, of all places, Midas Touch, about the prediction markets and how rigged the prediction markets are and what a load of shit they are. But surely something in the polls is true, right? Something in some polls is true. And one of the questions I've got is, there are a bunch of polls that say she's got a problem with black men, or she's got a problem with Hispanics, or now we may have a problem because, frankly, the notion that somehow all black men or all Hispanics should vote as a bloc is pretty racist. That's kind of wrong. But what are you seeing in the data that gives you a sense of there's a place to work? Or are we now entering the period in which it is what it is, focus on the turnout?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to the polls first, I'm just about to the point where I'm tuning them out, which is something that I didn't think I would ever say, because I was up at like midnight to see when Marist was dropping polls a few weeks ago. I couldn't wait until. That is
a sad admission, you guys. You are hopeless nerds.
I don't ever read the polls, so I'm saying welcome.
Yeah. I say
I'm not proud of it, but there is so much weirdness in the polls now when you look under the hood, even in good polls, that there's just something happening. But in the end, they're all gravitating towards like plus or minus 2 or 3 points. A lot of them, they'll just throw it up in all 7 states and it's plus or minus 1 point. So there's not a lot that it's going to tell us at this point, the public polling, that we didn't already know. In terms of where there's work to be done, for me, it's back to this front foot analogy, that you look at what has been consistent in the polling. Number one, we know since Dobbs, because we've talked about this a ton, and it's reflected in the voter registration data that I saw, that we have such an opportunity just to engage and mobilize younger voters, especially younger women of color, right? And I believe that is happening, but there's an opportunity to do more. Something that we've seen in the polls, I think a lot of people questioned, but it's actually bearing out in the early vote data, is the fact that the vice president was doing, and frankly, President Biden had similar numbers to some extent, but the vice president is doing so well with seniors. Again, makes sense when you think about some of these elements. We look at the early vote data in Michigan, in the biggest increases in early voter among older black women. And it's not just older voters of color, it's older white voters as well. They just, I think, are a little bit sick of Donald Trump. So I think there's a front foot opportunity there as well. If you want to look at the flip side of that coin, the Trump campaign says that they have this sort of hidden strength with younger men. Well, the younger men they're talking about are about the lowest propensity voters out there. Not about the lowest, they are the lowest propensity voters. And so if you're counting on those voters to turn things around for your campaign, when you haven't actually built a robust on the ground campaign operation, it's why they're going to these places. But I think it's also why you're seeing the vice president and her campaign now, all the talk about Joe Rogan, should she do it? Shouldn't she do it? They're seeing these front foot opportunities to really go to the voters that the Trump campaign is clearly counting on, and they're on the offensive there. You mentioned,
I think the answer to that is actually you just leave like cases of beer everywhere, because the young guys will be like, "I'm gonna go vote. What? Free beer?"
Yeah. But free beer has been David, free beer has been an important part of politics for a long time.
One more kind of campaign. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is not a new thing in politics. Free beer, really important.
You can't give water to people standing in line in Georgia, but you can leave free beer outside of frat house.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the last thing I wanted to say is just in terms of, you mentioned Republicans talk about improving with voters of color, especially black voters, Latino voters. There's no doubt that over the last decade, when you're comparing to Obama performance, the Democratic numbers are slightly lower. But when you look at the polls that are actually digging deeper, we worked with Howard University on a poll exclusively of black voters in battleground states. There was no difference. the vice president is performing at or above the 2020 numbers with black voters, and I think has the potential to do even better in the closing here just from turnout differential. So it's not to say that it doesn't exist. I just think it's been overblown.
Same question, Simon.
Same question is, just remind me what the question
Well, the question, that's okay. I saw you were drifting off there. I'm sorry. I couldn't.
I had a thing happen on my phone I had to deal with. I apologize.
No, it's okay. We're the three of us will wait for you to catch up. But no, I think my question is, in the polling, is there anything that we should be looking at, or should we be joining Tara in the pool where it's warm and there are no polls?
I think what's happening, and Tom and I were interviewed by Mara Liasson for an NPR story about polling, and Lee, I'm forgetting Lee's last name, Tom, from Marist, who's the lead pollster for Marist, said that, we're asking polling to have a level of precision that it's just not capable of having. And I think what everyone has to realize right now is that the election's close, and it's going to be close to Election Day. And I don't think we're really going to see. It's been remarkably stable now for 5 weeks, right? It's been since the debate. It's been remarkably stable, remarkably consistent, and there's been very little meaningful movement. The only movement that you can really see is because the Republicans dropping now over 65 polls into the polling averages to try to push those polling averages a little bit, right? A point here, a point there, which tipped a few of the states into looking like they're really for Trump. But I don't really believe that. And I just think that we have to just keep working really hard. I mean, I think that we can win this election. I think that the thing that Tom mentioned, I just want to put an exclamation on something Tom said, which is that the Trump campaign is making an enormous bet on a group of voters that don't vote very much without having a field operation to turn them out, right? Which is, very kind of Trumpian in its idiocy.
Well, it's even dumber because he outsourced it to Elon.
Yeah, outsourced it to right. And the thing I'll say is that something Tom said is very important. We have been told over the last several years that Hispanics are drifting away from us, blacks are drifting away, young people are drifting away, left-handed, blah, 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 have been drifting away. And, Tom did a poll of blacks in the battleground states showing that we're meeting our 2020 numbers. The Harvard IOP poll showed that Kamala Harris is doing better with young people than Biden did. And, I did a poll in North Carolina that showed, that has not been released publicly, and Harris is doing better with Latinos in North Carolina than Biden did in 2020. I just talked to somebody in Las Vegas who's a very significant political person there, who said he thinks that we're actually going to do better with Hispanics in Nevada than we did in 2020. That I interviewed Ruben Gallego last night, who said that Harris is basically, in a position to win in Arizona, and that she's probably going to outperform Biden with Hispanics in Arizona. So all these things we've been told, right, that are largely based on 80 interviews in a 1,000-person sample national poll have been bullshit. And so I think the key thing here is that we're just in a position where we can win this election. It is very close, closer than any of us would have wanted at this point. Let's be very clear. But the struggle Republicans are having in the battleground Senate races and in the governor's race in North Carolina is really a big problem for them, right? There's a downward drag on the top of the ticket in every one of these battleground states. We've got abortion ballot initiatives in a few states that we think are going to give us another point or two, right? When I talk to people on the ground, not people who are going on MSNBC in Washington every day, the Democrats on the ground are deeply optimistic about what they're seeing for people who've been involved in elections again and again and again in these places. My friend who ran Cortez Masto Senate race, Scott Fairchild in Nevada in 2022, told me that right now, based on their IDs, right, they go to doors, they ask Democrat, they trace this stuff over time. We're doing better in the IDs that we did in 2020 and 2022. And he said in Nevada, and this is historically far more predictive than any polls. And so there's just what's interesting is when you go into the states, people feel good, right? And they have data going back a long time, right? I mean, these are places that people have been running these elections a long time. The early vote numbers in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are really good, right? Like North Carolina, they have a huge mountain to climb with Mark Robinson and the implosion of Mark Robinson. Josh Stein's going to win that race by 15 points. How do you overcome that? There's never been a race that can overcome that kind of negativity on the ground. And we have the best state party, one of the best state party chairs in the country. And so I think that what's so interesting is that the people on the ground feel really good about where we are. And that to me, in some ways, matters more than the latest NBC poll showing us dropping 2 points within margin of error when these things are going to bounce around like crazy in the next few weeks.
Yeah, well, and also, someday after the election's over, I don't want to alienate anybody just yet, but we have to have a conversation about how lousy Steve Kornacki is. But that's another conversation. People don't want to hear it, but we'll have that conversation. Tara, and then I'm going to go to each of you. We'll each give you 1 minute. I would like 1 minute for something that you've been tracking that is a surprise that nobody else is talking about, like a race that you think Dems are going to get that nobody expected, a result that nobody expects. What is just something that's sort of on your radar that you're saying, maybe this is going to go the other way.
We're winning the TikTok war, which is great and was not a sure thing for a very long time. But in terms of the amount of positive content and sentiment on it, which is I've always said this is going to be the TikTok election. So that is actually something in our wheelhouse at Courier. That is important.
And by the way, I think based on some things that I know, I think there's more of that coming. I think we're going to see a real surge in that over the next 3 weeks.
Oh, it's already happening. It's amazing. I am not in the prediction market, and I hesitate to say this, but I am really interested in what's happening in Texas. It is a super long shot, but Colin Allred has raised an enormous amount of money. I think he has found his footing. There were some incredible moments in his debate with Ted Cruz this past week that went viral. I think he took him to task. We know Ted Cruz is one of the most hated men in politics and in America, including in his party. Even if Cullen doesn't win, I think it's going to be far closer than anyone imagines. And that will actually move that state much closer to being able to be blue, because it really is a non-voting state, not a Republican state. It's just a non-voting state where more Republicans vote. And so it's also, shameless plug, Courier just opened its first newsroom in Texas. There's going to be 5 hubs next year, but I'm watching Texas. I am really, really, really interested. And I never trust conventional wisdom, and conventional wisdom would say that we don't really have a chance there, but I don't know.
See, if I was going to make a prediction, I would have predicted that Tara was going to predict Texas. Tom, make a prediction.
I had 2 to choose from in my head, and one was Texas.
Well, everybody has Texas as one of them, yeah, and I know you've got another. And then Simon is
an even number year if it wasn't Democrats looking at Texas and wondering just maybe one of these years we're going to be right. And look, there are surprises in every election, and if you want to pick one, that's a pretty good one. I agree. The look on Ted Cruz's face in that debate when he was confronted about hiding in a supply closet on January 6th is just like, I don't know. That's something. The other one, this is a bit of a recycle. I mentioned this before, but I want to emphasize this. Again, looking at the early vote data, our expectation has been that Republicans would have a much larger share of the early vote across the battleground because their dear leader has told them that now it's okay. You can vote early. You can vote by mail. It's not fraudulent anymore. And while we've seen a little pivoting in some of these states, to see in Michigan, to see black voters turn out at a larger share than they did in 2020, to me was actually a really big surprise. And that's actually not getting a lot of attention. And the fact that that's coming on the heels of Donald Trump talking trash about Detroit and saying that if you elect Vice President Harris, she'll turn everywhere into Detroit. What a stupid move to say that. And so to see it in the data, the actual reaction of just massive turnout from voters, not just in Detroit, but again, to see black voters overwhelmingly coming out in bigger numbers. I think not enough people are talking about that, and they should.
That's a good one. Simon, they've only left you with overperformance among under 30 atheist dog owners.
Mine is North Carolina. I think we're gonna win North Carolina. I think the stars have aligned there. I think Mark Robinson has polluted the Republican brand and embarrassed the Republican Party. We have a spectacular party chair who's bringing. She sent me last night. They knocked on their 900,000th door in a state that has 5.4 million people voted in last time. They're going to probably knock on 1 million to 1.2 million doors, 20% of the state of the electorate who's going to vote. It's an incredible achievement, by them. North Carolina's never had this kind of grassroots leadership before. They've had sort of a weak party structure there for a long time. And this stuff can easily mean 2 to 3 points in an election. And also Josh Stein is doing really well and is, we interviewed him together, Tara and I, and he just was so strong and confident and together and ready. And I just think the stars are aligning where we're going to flip this state. And we're also going to liberate the people of North Carolina from some of the most extremist politicians in the country by winning some state legislative seats that will prevent them from having a supermajority there. And so very high stakes. And I do think the last thing I'll say is that the thing to watch is there's going to be very consequential state legislative races in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Arizona. If we flip the 2 chambers in Arizona, it'll be the first time we've had control in 60 years in Arizona. In Wisconsin, we have the fair maps now where we could actually have control of one of the chambers in Wisconsin to, again, send what has been one of the most extremist political parties in the country packing, and just similarly in North Carolina. And so those 3 states, there's incredibly important stuff happening at the state legislative level that will disable some of the most extremist legislatures that have been laboratories for autocracy, that have been critical, that we can disable in this election. So, I feel like, the election we all wanted to have is in front of us. And if we just put our heads down and do the work, we can have the election we all want to have in a few weeks.
Totally agree with you. My prediction that I will add to all of your predictions is that not only is Trump going to lose, but the Trump brand is going to lose across a lot of states, and that the people, the extremists like Mark Robinson that Trump has picked, are going to be seen as big losers for the GOP. And that's going to produce some kind of a reset because they're going to see that a lot of these bad candidates, Trump's really bad at people in addition to everything else. Well, look, we'll have you back in a couple of weeks, and hopefully everybody will be happier and more enthusiastic, and that everybody will still rather be us than them. And
we're still winning, but we haven't won yet.
Yeah, exactly. But and then 2 weeks later, we won, and we won that, and that'll be a whole different conversation. But until then, you guys are the best. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Tara. And thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been the most useful 40 minutes of discussion of this campaign that you'll get this week. Share it with your friends. And we'll be back with more each and every day here at the DSR Network. Bye-bye.